Hello everyone, and welcome to my Soap Twist 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. As Hope folded the final blouses into the shabby luggage that had previously transported her wedding fantasies across the Atlantic, her fingers shook. In addition to the subtle metallic tang of her tears, the room smelled of lavender detergent. Los Angeles glittered outside the window in the ruthless midday light, oblivious to the way her world had broken apart like an egg on the kitchen tiles. Between Liam's writings, she had discovered the ultrasound image, a pixelated black and white world with a little heartbeat pulsing. Hope's own skin might as well have been emblazoned with the name on the corner, Steffi Forrester. She kept staring at it until the image became blurry and that would grow into a kid began to resemble a period at the end of every statement she had ever uttered to Liam about forever, rather than a promise. The front door clicked downstairs. Liam's soft, nearly singing voice drifted up the stairway. "Wishes? Are you home, sweetie? You like those lemon bars I brought," she said, shutting the luggage. No scream she could have matched the sound of the zipper. With wind-blown hair and cheeks flushed with the same joy that once belonged to her, he emerged in the doorway. Like an unformed apology, the paper bag from the bakery hung from his fingers. When he noticed the baggage, his smile wavered and he murmured, "Hey, are you going somewhere?" Hope felt nothing but the hollowness of a seashell held to her ear as she saw his eyes, the shifting ocean eyes that had previously given her the impression that the tide would always return. "I am aware of the baby." The lemon bars thudded softly and obscenely against the hardwood. The floorboards were smeared with yellow frosting. Liam's mouth parted, then reopened. Only the tiny animal cry of a man realizing the cliff edge has already collapsed beneath him was heard. No words were spoken. The luggage was surprisingly light, so she lifted it and said, "I hope, don't." The truth weighted more than all of her clothing, cosmetics, and the silk scarf her mother had given her for her 21st birthday. "I'm not requesting justifications." He sprang forward and grabbed her wrist, saying, "I'm not asking for anything." His hold was familiar, desperate, and comforting. It was a single evening. One drunken, foolish night following the cabin fire. "I was mourning, Steffi." She was grieving. "Mourning," Hope repeated. The word had a rusty tang. "While you were still wearing the ring I put on your finger, you were lamenting the end of your marriage to her." Liam winced as though she had hit him. Perhaps she had. His voice cracked as he said, "I love you. Hope you are loved." She glanced at the hand around her wrist and the small white line where his wedding band had been and said, "This baby, it doesn't change that." He claimed the metal bothered his skin, so he stopped wearing it weeks ago. Apparently, there were many different kinds of lies. "Liam, love isn't a sensation. It's a decision. You also choose her." She gently but firmly pulled loose once more, like you do when you close a book you no longer require. "I deserve to be the first person to select myself. Each and every day." His knees gave way. He fell onto the edge of the bed they had chosen together at a Venice Beach flea market, the one with the mattress that dipped in the middle so they would always roll toward each other at night, and the chipped white paint. He would be the only one rolling now. Hope went past him, past the bleeding lemon bars on the floor and down the stairs. She didn't turn around. As she drove out of the city, she passed through neighborhoods in which she had once dreamed of raising children, streets lined with trees, driveways dotted with tricycles, and stick-figure families and chalk drawings of suns that faded beneath the sprinklers. She didn't turn on the radio. Songs had a way of surprising you with memories. Silence was safer. She arrived in the desert at dusk. Joshua trees, which like mourners raising their arms to a wounded sky, surrounded the highway as it thinned. At a fueling station with a solitary flickering light bulb, she pulled over. The clerk was listening to a soap opera on a portable radio inside, with voices rising and falling in familiar rhythms. "And Thomas Forrester has declared his love for Hope Logan, but can she accept it in light of Liam's treachery?" With a bottle of water halfway to her lips, Hope froze. The clerk gave a double take and looked up. She paid in cash and ran away before the woman could take a picture, muttering, "Hey, You look like, I get that a lot. The smell of faraway rain and creosote filled the air outside. Leaning against her car, she let out a harsh, brief laugh that sounded like slow-motion glass cracking. The world was watching, of course. Her heartbreak was prime-time entertainment, of course. Her cell rang. Thomas texted, "I seen the tabloids. I apologize. I'm available if you need anything at all. It has always been." The lettering blurred as she gazed at the screen. Thomas, who had loved her through all of her craziness, was steady and gloomy. Who, after witnessing her pick Liam 3 times, had continued to leave the door ajar. Another text, "I understand your pain. Give it to me to carry." She erased it after typing, "I'm leaving town." I typed "thank you," and then erased it as well. Ultimately, she didn't send anything. Some consolations seemed like quicksand masquerading as solid earth. The stars were sharp enough to cut through the dusty darkness. Hope returned to the vehicle and drove till the cell service vanished and the road turned to dirt. A motel with a vacancy sign that buzzed like a caged insect caught her attention. The bed was clean, but the room smelled like old cigarettes and mildew. On the chenille spread, she lay completely clothed and let the tears fall, not the pretty ones that smeared mascara, but the ugly, snotty sobs that left you feeling strangely light and hollowed out. The morning tasted of regret and copper. Wearing pants from yesterday and a t-shirt that read, "Big Sur Half Marathon 2019, a lie, she had never done the race, but Liam loved the color on her. She washed in water that never really heated up. Still holding on to the crumbs from the lemon bar, she tossed it in the garbage. The waitress at the next-door diner poured coffee without being asked. "Hard night, huh?" Hope was able to force a borrowed smile. The waitress, Darlene, handed a plate of pancakes across the counter and said, "Rough life." On the house. Hope ate mechanically, tasting nothing but sugar helps. A filthy pickup arrived from outside. With his boots crunching on gravel, Thomas emerged from the driver's door. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw was darkened, and he had the same resolute posture on his shoulders that she remembered from the day he had escorted her mother out of a burning building. He appeared to have not slept either. When he saw her through the window, he stopped and placed his hand on the diner door, allowing her to wave him away. She didn't. Above the door, the bell jingled. Without a question, Thomas slipped into the booth across from her. He had the slight sting of airline air and the scent of cedar up close. "How did you come across me?" "GPS on your car," he acknowledged. "Before you lose your mind, I didn't turn it on until after you had abandoned us 3 times. She ought to have been upset about the safety issue. Rather, she felt observed. "I will not return," she declared. He groaned at the cold and took a sip of her coffee, saying, "Didn't ask you to." Sensing the gravity of the situation, Darlene refilled their cups and stepped back with the poise of someone who had witnessed 1,000 heartbreaks. "I just wanted to make sure you weren't alone." Hope ran her hand over the edge of her mug. Thomas's voice was soft, but there was a flash of ferocity behind his eyes as he said, "I heard that Liam and Steffi are expecting a baby. I apologize." "Don't be. I am the fool who continued to believe in fairy tales." She laughed sourly. "I was warned by you, many years ago. Claimed that Liam would always take the easiest route." Thomas leaned forward with his elbows resting on the formica, saying, "I believed that love was resistance. The issue isn't love. It's timing." The scar through his left eyebrow from a childhood skateboard accident and the way his hands curled around the mug as if he were holding something delicate were the things she examined about him. Loyalty is. Hands that had previously held hers as she sobbed over Liam's first betrayal, hands that had drawn dresses that made women feel like queens. "Why now?" she inquired. "Why come play night in the middle of nowhere?" His voice trailed off as he said, "Because I'm sick of seeing you settle for scraps. Because you returned from your last trip out of town engaged to a man who didn't deserve you. And because," he paused, his jaw clenched, "because, Hope, you are loved. Not your concept. It's not the version that suits the drama of the Forrester family. You." Before moving spiders, the woman apologizes to them. Who in the car sings off-key to power ballads from the 1980s? Who once helped a stranger replace a tire in the rain for 3 hours? Her throat shut. I'm not requesting that you return my affection, Thomas. Not right now. Perhaps never. Let me be your friend, nevertheless. So that you may sleep, let me drive the next 100 miles. If you want to scream about how unjust everything is, let me buy you the worst diner pie in the world and listen to you. Hope gazed out the window at the unending roadway that shimmered in the heat. Behind her, press conferences and paternity revelations were happening all over Los Angeles. Only possibility and dust lay ahead. Palm raised, she slid her hand across the table. Thomas laced his fingers through hers after a beat. In contrast to all the promises Liam had ever broken, his hold was firm and warm. All right, she muttered. But I choose the music. Thomas grinned, and the smile lingered in his eyes.
Agree.
They left the cafe with 2 paper cups of coffee that would go cold before they drank them and a styrofoam box of pie, but I'm planning an intervention if you play another Taylor Swift Sorrow album. As they moved onto the road, Hope, in the passenger seat for the first time in years, watched the motel in the rearview mirror dwindle to a speck while the desert absorbed the sound of the motor. She didn't cry once more. She wasn't carrying it alone for the first time in months, not because the anguish had gone away. It still weighed heavily, like a stone in her chest. Miles later, Thomas reached over and switched off the radio as the sun began to bleed orange across the horizon. The automobile was as quiet as flannel. Hey, he murmured. What's it worth? You will be all right. Hope closed her eyes and allowed her hair to get tangled by the wind from the open window. I understand, she said. And she nearly believed it for the first time. Behind them, the never-ending cycle of betrayals and second chances in Los Angeles continued. The road unwound ahead like a blank page. Without intending to, Hope put her head against the window and started to dream of a place where the story hadn't been written yet. 2 crimson eyes winked out against the wide, heartless darkness as the pickup's taillights vanished into the twilight. A DJ devoted a song to broken loves and fresh start somewhere in the static between channels. They didn't both hear it. They were too preoccupied with driving to the next destination. And if Liam stood in an empty nursery painting clouds on walls that would never contain his kid with Hope, well, if the headlines cried out months later about Hope Logan's unexplained disappearance and Thomas Forrester's abrupt sabbatical, well, that was a different matter. The girl who eventually realized that leaving did not equate to losing had this one. Closing the door on a life that no longer fit and heading into the desert with just a suitcase, a broken heart, and the silent confidence that someone, somewhere, would pick you first is sometimes the bravest thing you can do. As though the sky itself knew that hearts would shatter before the day was over, the rain had begun to fall gently that morning. With her fingers shaking against the edge of her coffee cup, Hope sat near the window. The turmoil inside her was reflected in the storm outside. She hadn't slept. The words, which she prayed she could unhear, had kept repeating in her mind. Liam, how were you able to? Her voice pierced the quiet as she whispered to herself. Just a week ago, it had started out as a typical day. They were meant to be deciding on the song for their first dance, the seating arrangements, and the flowers. Hope had envisioned laughing, sunshine, and white roses. Now, however, she saw only falsehoods and shadows. Liam was her safe haven when they first met. Where others were careless, he was steadfast. Where others were vicious, he was loving. Slowly, though, that stability had given way to uncertainty. He had become aloof, preoccupied with something or someone she initially couldn't identify. Then the truth struck through the glass like a razor. She hadn't been searching for it or going through his texts or phone. When she saw the message shining on his screen while he was taking a shower, it had just fallen into her hands. Liam, I'm afraid. Her breath caught as the test came back positive. She briefly considered the possibility that it was an old message or a miscommunication. However, everything inside of her broke as she saw the name. Amber. Amber had been Liam's friend. Hope recalled how he had laughed off her uneasiness the night he had taken her to a dinner party. He had stated, "She's just assisting with a project." Hope had taken him seriously. She had always trusted him. Now that she was looking at the message, she understood that her biggest error had been believing. Liam halted at the sight of her face as he came out of the shower with a towel wrapped over his shoulders. The phone was clasped between her trembling palms like a confession she didn't want to keep. She interrupted him. Does she not have a child? Quietness. Her response was that silence. Her chest grew constricted. She waited for something, for denial, for an explanation, but all he did was stare at her with a remorse that no amount of words could ease. Her eyes were watering, but she fought the need to cry. How much time? She inquired. His voice was hardly audible above a whisper when he continued. 3 months. 3 months. He told her he wanted to be with her forever after they went on that weekend excursion to the lake. She was ill. Hope turned her back on him and gazed out the window as though the outer world may provide her with something solid to cling to. She responded, her voice faltering. You said I was your future. You are, he murmured, taking a step forward. I hope it was an error. I didn't intend for it to occur. I was inebriated and disoriented. I believed you didn't, she whirled, her eyes piercing with tears. You dare not put this on me. He halted, saying, Don't you dare say you were confused. Now it seemed like miles separated them. In an attempt to stop the sob from rising in her throat, Hope put her palms to her face and took a deep breath. Liam, we were meant to get married. He stretched out, but she retreated. I was supposed to walk down that aisle and promise you forever, he said. Avoid touching me, she commanded. Once so lovely on her hand, the engagement ring now seemed like a chain. She took it off slowly and set it on the table between them. This is yours to keep, she muttered. You've taken enough from me already. Hope packed her belongings that evening. She kept her destination a secret from both her mother and her pals. Before she began to despise herself for loving someone who could so thoroughly betray her, she had to leave. The headlights pierced the night like lone stars throughout the lengthy trip out of town. Every mile she traveled brought back memories of their first kiss beneath the fall foliage, the night he told her she was alone, and their coffee-drinking and quiet-laughing mornings. She felt empty by the time the city lights went out. She stayed in a little cottage near the sea for a week. As though echoing her suffering, the sea was untamed and the waves were agitated. She waited for the pain to subside every day as she watched the horizon, but it never did. The mere act of betrayal does not cause love to disappear. Like smoke after fire, it persists, brittle and unyielding. Her door was knocked on one afternoon. Thinking it was the wind, she nearly didn't open it. But she froze when she did. She said the word, Thomas. She felt her chest ache as he stood there, drenched from the rain, his eyes full of worry. I needed to locate you, he murmured quietly. Hope looked away and said, No one has heard from you in days. I didn't want to be discovered. I understand, Thomas said, entering. But Hope, you can't just vanish like this. She wanted to beg him to go so she could cry in peace, but his voice was firm, and his presence, despite its complexity, seemed like a welcome relief from the cold she had been carrying. You're hurting, but you're not alone. After a pause, Thomas continued, Liam is sorry. Hope offered a tiny, sour laugh. He's going crazy. Thomas nodded slowly, saying, He ought to have considered that before he deceived me. You're correct. He ought to have. The rain hitting the roof was the only sound to break the long quiet between them. Then, with a softer tone, Thomas spoke once more. You ended things with Liam. I am aware of that. However, Hope, startled by the sincerity in his voice, she looked up and said, I'm here. Thomas had always been a complex person who saw her in ways that others did not, a blend of mystery and charm. She could have loved him in a different life. But at the moment, love seemed to be a language she was unable to understand. I can't, she muttered. I can't open my heart again, not right now. Thomas murmured softly. I'm not asking you to. His comments, I just want you to know you're not forgotten, resonated deeply with her. She had felt invisible for days, as if her suffering were unnoticed. But now that someone actually spotted her, That tiny act of kindness nearly brought her to her knees. As the tears streamed down her cheeks, Thomas hesitated for a second before brushing one away. He said, "You deserve someone who picks you every single day." Hope shut her eyes. "Perhaps someday," she remarked. Thomas nodded and said, "But right now, I just want to remember who I was before all this. Then begin by doing it." He quickly departed, but his words echoed in her mind like the echo of something she didn't yet comprehend. "I'll be here when you're ready." Weeks passed. Through journaling, morning walks by the sea, and painting once more, Hope started to reconstruct her peaceful environment. She did, however, occasionally think of Liam during the most violent waves, not out of longing, but rather out of sadness for what might have been. Liam, on the other hand, had to live with the results of his decisions. Every time he picked up the phone, he knew it was too late, even though he had wanted to make things right and promise Hope that he would accept responsibility. His reality was Amber's pregnancy. He promised himself that he would act morally, but the emptiness Hope left behind was intolerable, and guilt tore at him. In his nightmares, he would hear her laughter and read her name in old messages. He understood that love only haunts you in a different way. It doesn't go when you make a mistake. Thomas discovered him sitting outside the studio one evening with his head in his hands. Thomas whispered softly, "You should give her time to heal." With red eyes, Liam looked up. "You believe I'm unaware of that? Everything was damaged by me." Thomas sighed. "You did." But before Liam spoke again, there was a long pause. "Don't make it worse by dragging her back into your guilt. Are you in love with her?" Thomas took a while to respond. At long last, he murmured, "I care about her. Enough to spare her the harm you inflicted."